Hey everyone, I'm Matt Stockton, and I want to start off by telling you a little, very short story from when I was in college back in 2001, 2002, a long time ago. A counselor said something to me that I've never forgotten. I don't even remember what I was telling him about at the time. All I remember is telling him I can't do it, whatever it was. And he responded with, "Well, who says?" And right off the bat, I started laughing because I knew what he was getting at. Nobody had told me that I couldn't do whatever it was. I told myself that. And here, close to 24 years later, I still remember those words. And that's what I want to talk about today. The question stuck with me. Who says? Nobody said I couldn't do it. I just decided I couldn't, and that became my reality. And the question was so simple, but it changed how I looked at things. And I think we all do this from time to time. Something comes up that we're not sure about, and we go right to, I can't. We don't even question it, and then it becomes a habit, and before long, we're living defeated lives. I spent years saying I couldn't do things. And now that I look back, I realize I was the only obstacle. Nobody was getting in my way except me. And then I'd blame circumstances or bad luck or whatever else I could think of. But really, I believed I couldn't, so I didn't try. And sure, there's some people out there who tried to discourage me. We'll always get that. But why discourage yourself as well? You've got enough going against you already. And the enemy loves it when we attack ourselves because he doesn't have to do anything. We're already convincing ourselves that we're limited, that we're not good enough or smart enough or brave enough or whatever it is. We're already tearing ourselves down before anyone else gets a chance to do it. And the enemy just sits back and watches us do his work for him. And we can spend a ton of energy reinforcing these beliefs. You tell yourself you can't do something, and then you spend years collecting evidence that proves you're right. You see other people succeed, and you come up with reasons why it's different for them. They're smarter, they had better luck, they had connections. You're basically working really hard at building a case against yourself. But God doesn't operate like that. He doesn't look at you and think, yeah, you suck. He doesn't do that. God doesn't create people and then decide they're limited. Let's look at what Jesus says in John 14:12. Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these. He's talking to his disciples here. These are just normal, everyday people. Some of them are going to make huge mistakes, some are going to deny him and run off, but Jesus still tells them that they'll do greater things. And it's not because they're special or superhuman or anything like that, but because they believe. Belief and faith is everything. It can completely change how you approach things. It affects whether or not you even try. And when you believe something's possible, you act differently by taking risks. You learn, you push through when it gets hard. But when you believe something is impossible, you don't even bother because you've already decided the outcome. Let's look at Peter. He was just a fisherman. When Jesus first called him, Peter was afraid and confused. He said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." He didn't think he was good enough, and I totally get that. I wouldn't either if Jesus approached me. He didn't think he had what it took to be a disciple. He had already decided that he couldn't do it. But Jesus said, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Peter could have said, "I'm just a fisherman, I can't do that." And that probably would have been the end of it. His life would have been completely different. But instead, he chose to believe Jesus. He chose to say yes, even though he had no idea what he was really doing. And then he spent the rest of his life learning and becoming one of the most important leaders in the history of the church. It wasn't because Peter was naturally gifted or anything like that, but because he chose to believe he could do it. He had faith. Matthew 14 shows the same thing. Jesus tells Peter to walk out on the water toward him, and Peter actually does it. He walks on the water, but then he notices the wind and gets afraid and starts to sink. So Jesus grabs him and says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And it's interesting because Peter did the impossible there. But the moment doubt crept in, that moment he stopped believing, he started to sink. The ability didn't change, it was his belief that changed. And that's exactly what happens to us. We're capable of things we never attempt because we doubt ourselves. We're capable of learning and growing and doing things that would change our lives. But we get in our own way. We listen to the voice that says, I can't, and we don't even try. Then there's also the story of Gideon. Gideon was the weakest member of his family, and his family was the weakest clan. And when the angel of the Lord came to him and said, The Lord is with you, mighty warrior, Gideon's response was basically, Wait, what? You talking to me? Have you seen me? Do you know who I am? He didn't think he was capable. He had all kinds of reasons why he couldn't do what God was asking. He was weak. His family was weak. He didn't have the skills or talents. He didn't have the resources. But God kept pushing back against him. God said, I will be with you. And that's what changed things. Not Gideon suddenly becoming strong all on his own, but him believing that God was with him. And then Gideon defeated an army that outnumbered him. He accomplished something that seemed impossible. But it started with him choosing to believe instead of listening to all the reasons he couldn't do it, instead of listening to that doubt in his mind. God gave you gifts for a reason. He didn't put talents and abilities in you just to have them sit there. He didn't create you with all this potential then expect you to waste it. And when you refuse to try because you've already decided you can't do something, you're basically ignoring what God put in you. You're telling God, hey, thanks for these gifts and all, but I kind of suck, so I'm not going to use them. I'm not even going to bother. And look at what happened with the disciples in the early church. These guys didn't have any formal training. They weren't educated by the standards of the time. Peter was illiterate, but when they were filled with the Holy Spirit and started preaching, thousands of people became believers. Acts 4:13 says, When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. They weren't astonished because these guys were gifted speakers or anything like that. They were astonished because they were just ordinary, normal, unschooled guys who had the courage to speak. They believed they could do it. They believed that God was with them. And that belief, that faith changed everything. They went and basically turned the world upside down. So I'm not saying belief alone makes you good at things. That's not really how it works. You still have to put in the effort. You still have to practice and learn. You still have to deal with failure and frustration and rejection. But belief is what keeps you in the game long enough to actually get good at something. Without the belief, you quit the moment it gets hard. Think about what happens when you believe versus when you don't believe. When you believe you can do something, you start. You learn, you mess up and try again. You make mistakes. You ask for help, you practice. You get a little better at this, get a little better at that, and then you keep going. And over time, you actually become capable of doing whatever this thing is you're trying to do. But when you believe you can't, you don't even start. You don't even try, you don't learn, you never practice, and you never discover what you might be capable of. God's voice tells you, yes, you can, you're capable. God's voice tells you that you can learn, tells you to step out and try even when you're not sure. The voice telling you that you can't, that's fear, doubt. That's the enemy trying to keep you limited. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, Paul writes, For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and a sound mind. God gave you power. Not the power to do whatever you want, but the power to face difficulty, to learn, and persevere when things get difficult. That power is in you already. You just have to start believing it. So what do you believe you can't do? What do you think is impossible? Because beliefs can change. I bet you've changed your belief about a lot of things in life, so why not change this belief as well? And start small. You don't have to do something massive tomorrow, but just do something. Take one small step toward the thing you've been telling yourself you can't do. Pray about it. Ask God for guidance to help you believe, and see what happens. See what you're actually capable of when you stop listening to that lying voice, that voice of the enemy telling you that you can't. Because you can do more than you think you can. Not because you have everything figured out, but because God is with you. And when God is with you, the limitations you've put on yourself don't matter anymore. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.